So I've always been so intrigued by how these wonderful vines have impacted humanity and how they've been so undeniably intrinsic and interwoven into our culture as a species. Um, it's incredibly interesting how the lifespan of a vine will mirror or mimic our lifespan as human beings, or maybe we're mimicking them. Vines, when they're grafted and when they're incepted as babies, they act very much like new human beings. And when they're old and become less productive or more decrepit, it becomes time to call it a day and replant and start new life. Let's take you on that journey and talk a little bit about that. This is a newly replanted vineyard. It was pulled up and replanted about 4 months ago. The vines that were inhabiting this space were about 40 years in age, and as vines mature and get to a certain stage in life, the natural production of their fruit declines quite dramatically. So in the interest of farming for an agricultural product that'll eventually become an artisan product and beverage, it was necessary to start new life. Vines, much like a human, are not grown from a single seed, but they are a product of interwoven characteristics from both a mother and father. They're not hatched like an egg. This little baby right here is a brand new vine, and as you can see, it's a set of vine material that has been grafted on top of a father root. So in order to create a new vine and a new life, what we do is we take a mother plant and take cuttings from a mother plant, and we create a graft point onto a rootstock. And that's how we start a new life. Now, as that newly grafted vine takes root and starts to grow and crawl, if you will, it takes about 4 years for the plant to come into production in a fruit stage where we can start to harvest. Much like a child, it stumbles along and it learns to start to walk and eventually start to talk. But in its adolescence and its youth, while it does produce much vigor, the product that it produces is somewhat lacking in characteristic and importance at first. And when it grows up, about 5 to 7 years in, it starts to produce something of quality. Now, in the teenage phase of a vine's lifespan, it grows up to a point where we start to train it and trellis it on a set of wires and produce a foundation, much like a young person gets into school and starts to learn how to eventually become more fruitful and more productive to society, such as the lifespan of a vine in the early stages of a vine. We trellis it along these wires and start to train it, and then it becomes more fruitful and we're able to garner a better product. Now, typically speaking, a vine's most productive phase, when it's producing some of its very best quality fruit, comes in the range of about anywhere from 18 to 25 years, which I suppose in human terms would be more like our middle-age stage, so our 30s and our 40s. The vine has wisdom and is gaining more wisdom. The roots are deep and well taken, and the product is beautiful and glorious. And yet there is still very much vigor, and it hasn't slowed down, and it's the prime stage. Now, after middle age, the vine goes through sort of a midlife crisis, if you will, when it hits around 30, 35 years old, which in human terms might equate to 45, 50, maybe 55 years old. And it goes through a stage of confusion and the fruit starts to slightly decline and the yield goes down just a bit. And it's a tough period of life, and as we grow these vines for production of a quality product during this phase, we have to consider pulling these wonderful vines out if they can't make it through that tough phase. But if they're resilient and you believe in them and they make it past that stage to an older life, it can sometimes be very worth it. And an older vine will start to produce a low yield, but the grapes that it will produce are packed full of wisdom and wonder. And you can have wines produced from those grapes that are quite magical. During the final stages of a vine's life, it is packed full of nostalgia and beautiful memory. But many times the vine will become plagued with disease, or it'll lose a limb, and it becomes time to consider new life and move on. And as we plant a new vineyard, we will take graftings and cuttings from these beautiful past vines and pass on those characteristics to a new generation full of life and new vigor, and the memory lives on in the bottle. And then we take these vines and spread the ashes on the earth, and with prayer and solace, we start anew.